ሰላም ጤና ይስጥልኝ የተወደዳችሁ የሮሃ ቤተሰቦች የተለያዩ እንግዶችን እየጋበዝን ውይይት የምናደርግበት የማዕዛ እንግዳ የተሰኘው ፕሮግራማችን ነው። በዛሬ ፕሮግራማችን እንግዳ ይዘንላችሁ መተናል። እንግዳችን ጀማል ካውንቲስ ይባላል። ጀማል ካውንቲስ በተለያዩ ስራዎቹ እናውቀዋለን። ጀማል ካውንቲስን ለማታውቁት እስቲ ማን ነው የሚለውን ሰምተን እንመለስ። ጀማል ካውንቲስ በዋሽንግተን ዲሲ የሚኖር የፎቶግራፍ ጋዜጠኛ ሲሆን ላለፉት 16 ዓመታት በኢትዮጵያ የተካሄዱ ጦርነቶችና ማንነት ተኮር ጥቃቶችን ሲዘግብ ይታወቃል። ጀማል ካውንቲስ ከወልቃይት እስከ ሁመራ፣ ከሁመራ እስከ ራያ፣ ከራያ እስከ መተከል፣ ከመተከል እስከ ደራ የደረሱ ግፎችን፣ ሰቆቃዎችንና ማንነት ተኮር ጥቃቶችን በካሜራው አስቀርቶ ለዓለም አሳውቋል። በማንነታቸው ምክንያት ከተደገሰላቸው ሞት ተርፈው በየመጠለያው የተበተኑ አማራዎችን ከሐይቅ ጃሬ እስከ ዘንዘልማ፣ ከጃራ እስከ ደብረ ብርሃን፣ ከደባርቅ እስከ ደብረ ታቦር ተዘዋውሮ ረሃባቸውን፣ መከራቸውን፣ ህመማቸውን ለዓለም ነግሮላቸዋል። በትልልቅ የዓለም መድረኮች ላይ ፎቶአቸውን አንግቦ ድምጽ ሆኗቸዋል። ጀማል ካውንቲስ በቅርቡ ከፌዴሬሽን ኦፍ አማራ ኢን ኖርዝ አሜሪካ ፋና ባገኘው ድጋፍ ደግሞ ወደ ኡጋንዳ ተጉዞ አማራዊ ማንነታቸውና ሙያቸው በሀገራቸው እንዳይኖሩ ያደረጋቸው ልጅ፣ ባል፣ ሚስት፣ እናትና አባታቸውን ጭምር ወደ ኋላ ትተው በኡጋንዳ በስደት የሚገኙ ጋዜጠኞችን አግኝቶ ያሉበትን ሁኔታ እንደሚከተለው በምስልና በጽሑፍ አጋርቶናል። ውድ የሮሃ አድማጭ ተመልካቾች ከጀማል ካውንቲስ ጋር ከላይ በሰማችሁት ታሪክ ዙሪያ አጠር ያለ ቆይታ አድርገናል። ተከታተሉን። እናመሰግናለን። እንግዲህ ከጀማል ጋር በቅርቡ ወደ ኡጋንዳ ተጉዞ በዛ የሚገኙ ጋዜጠኞችን በስደት ላይ የሚገኙ ኢትዮጵያዊ ጋዜጠኞችን በተለይ አማራ ጋዜጠኞችን ታሪካቸውን ያሉበትን ሁኔታ እና ሌሎች ዘገባዎችን ሰርቶ ተመልሷል። በዚህ ጉዳይ ላይ ቆይታ የምናደርግ ይሆናል። እስከ ፕሮግራማችን ፍጻሜ ድረስ አብራችሁን ቆዩ።
Exiled: The plight of Ethiopian journalist abroad. Jemal Countess, May 17th, 2025, beneath the veneer of massive public works projects and shiny new attractions constantly being unveiled in Addis Ababa, the Ethiopian government is engaged in a relentless campaign to silence those citizens who oppose the moral abuses and oppression by this regime. These citizens, especially those of the Amhara ethnic group, are the express targets of the Ethiopian government's campaigns of ethnic cleansing and erasure, demographic reengineering, and modernization projects undertaken in the capital city have resulted in the demolition of whole neighborhoods, displacing thousands of citizens, particularly ethnic Amharas who have lived in these neighborhoods for generations. These vanity projects have brought upheaval and misery to a people already beset by ruthless ethnic cleansing campaigns in regions outside of the city, away from the capital and the gaze of the diplomatic community based in Addis Ababa. Ethnic Amharas and those not in line with the government's mission are subjected to oppression, extreme violence, and murder by drone strikes, artillery barrages, and bands of soldiers from the National Defense Force killing civilians in the Amhara region with impunity. Simultaneously, in the Oromia region to the south of the capital, ethnic Amharas who had been living in the region for several generations after having been relocated there by previous regimes face acts of violence at the hands of various Oromo extremist groups seeking to erase Amharas from the region. The Ethiopian government has attempted to mask all of its violence and crimes by utilizing a horde of foreign social media influencers and journalists invited into the country to cover the new buildings and vanity projects and the supposed economic growth and progress. The same talking points are reported and repeated. The same neighborhoods are highlighted. The violent reality is ignored. In response, Fano, a regional Amhara militia, has resisted the government's actions. The government in turn claims that it is defending itself against Fano, which it describes as terrorist force operating to overthrow the government. The government often claims that the Fano are the main targets of their military operations. However, the number of civilian deaths caused by the targeting of purely civilian targets, markets, schools, and public squares offers a different picture. See reference with a thorough knowledge of the larger picture. It is plain to see that the information put forward by the Ethiopian government about its defensive posture is skewed, if not an outright fabrication. Independent Ethiopian journalists who have reported on the overt crimes and violence of the government towards the Amhara people have been threatened, tortured, imprisoned, and in some cases have disappeared altogether. Many journalists have been forced to flee the country in order to save their lives and the lives of their families. Some have had to flee solo, leaving behind their families who have borne the brunt of the Ethiopian government's wrath in their absence. The families of these journalists in exile have encountered beatings, physical and psychological threats, and torture, because their loved ones were simply doing what trained and ethical journalists do, which is report the news objectively and without bias. These journalists in exile still persist in their attempts to report the news and also tell the world of the brutal ordeals that forced them to flee their country. They have sought refuge in neighboring countries and beyond when able. Several of them have shared their experiences, seeking to enlighten the world about the true nature of the current Ethiopian regime and to bring an end to the violence faced by their families that still reside in Ethiopia. Belay Manaye is a 37-year-old husband and father of 2 young children who was forced to leave his family behind and flee Ethiopia to save his life. A journalism professional for 15 years and the current co-founder and editor-in-chief of Ethio News, Belay had been detained and jailed numerous times by the Ethiopian government for his reporting of the situation in Ethiopia. As the Ethiopian government sought to crack down on media coverage of its atrocities and crimes that targeted ethnic Amharas, Belay and dozens of other journalists were arrested and detained in various prison facilities around the country, often without due process or formal procedures. Belay's ethnicity and his open criticism of the Ethiopian government's treatment of ethnic Amharas and its war against the Amhara people in the Amhara region led to his arrest and detentions, the longest being from November 13, 2023 to June 17, 2024. Belay's numerous detentions included a stint in the notorious Awash military camp, where Belay faced abuse, torture, and forced starvation, all while living in subhuman living conditions. After being released from the prison in Awash, Belay made his escape to Uganda with a handful of others seeking refuge. Bekalu Alamrew is a 12-year veteran journalist from Ethiopia, having held positions ranging from engineer to programmer to editor-in-chief with various media companies. Bekalu has extensive knowledge in his field. Over the past 4 years since October 2020, Bekalu has been arrested 5 times for his reporting of the actions of the Ethiopian government during its war in the Tigray region and subsequent war in the Amhara region. Bekalu was first arrested at his place of work at Olo Media and thrown into a dark cell for 38 days, and then suddenly released without any court proceedings or process. Bekalu was subsequently arrested in 2022 and 2023 for his reporting on events in the Tigray region and allegations of atrocities by the Ethiopian National Defense Force. During the third arrest, the Ethiopian government confiscated all of the equipment and materials from Olo Media, warning Bekalu that you must be pro-government in his reporting. He was further warned to not talk about the war or the killing of civilians or to take assignments from foreign news outlets. After the government closed down Olo Media offices, Bekalu formed Alpha Media. Bekalu's final arrest came on August 5th, 2023, where he was taken from his office at Alpha Media and taken to the Awash Arba military training camp and prison in the Afar region. After nearly being starved to death, Bekalu was transferred to a federal police jail for medical treatment. All the while, Ethiopian security forces taunted Bekalu, telling him that he was going to die. Bekalu was sent back to a Awash Arba prison camp. Upon release from custody after 11 months of imprisonment and psychological abuse, Bekalu decided he would die by way of his choosing, and afterwards sought freedom outside of Ethiopia. Bekalu was forced to leave his wife and 2 young children and eventually settled in Uganda alongside other exiled journalists. Bekalu reflected, "They tried to kill my mind, but I am a big survivor here." Journalist Addisu Derebe Melika shared his experiences while at an undisclosed location in Kampala, Uganda on May 5, 2025. A journalist for Amhara Media, Addisu has been separated from his wife and twin baby daughter since June 15, 2023, when he was forced to flee Ethiopia to save his life after intense rounds of physical abuse and death threats made by the Ethiopian government. Prior to the war with Tigray, Addisu drew the ire of the Ethiopian government because of his reporting on the mass murders of ethnic Amhara that occurred before the 2020 war between the Ethiopian government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front. The relationship further deteriorated when during the Ethio-Tigray War, Addisu reported on the misconduct and atrocities committed by both the Ethiopian government forces and the TPLF, especially those that took place in the Amhara region. The harassment escalated when on October 1, 2021, government security forces pulled Addisu from a taxi as he was on his way to work and took him to an isolated location where they severely kicked and beat him and told him to stop reporting what he was reporting or next time he would lose his life. In spite of this event, Addisu continued his reporting, and the threats from the government escalated to the point where Addisu began to hide his family because the government security agents threatened, "If you don't stop, you will lose your family." Further violence occurred on February 16, 2022, when Addisu was at home with his family at 11 p.m., when security forces came into his home, terrorized his family, and seized him from his home and brutalized him in front of his children. On Monday, November 14, 2023, Addisu came to his office in Addis Ababa to see the front door wide open and all recording and media-related equipment gone. Following these episodes, Addisu moved his family to the countryside outside of Bahir Dar, hoping they would be in less danger. Addisu began operating from Bahir Dar under a new media company, Zamhara Media, until the harassment started again. The same security forces that had pursued him in Addis Ababa came to him in Bahir Dar, threatening and telling him he must stop his reporting or lose everything, including his life. Addisu also discovered that journalists, political analysts, and human rights activists across the country, especially Amhara journalists, who reported anything countering the government narrative or reported atrocities committed by the government, were being kidnapped, and some disappeared, their fates unknown until present day. After getting tipped off that he would be one of the next to be detained, Addisu made the decision to flee, leaving his wife, daughters, and way of life in Ethiopia. On June 15, 2023, Addisu started a life in exile in Kampala, still working for Zamhara Media and seeking to be a voice for the oppressed in Ethiopia. The following are testimonies from journalists in exile. My name is Jerusalem Mekanen, and I am an Ethiopian from the Amhara ethnic group. I used to live in Addis, where I used to work as a news anchor at the Amhara Media Corporation. While I was working at the Amhara Media Corporation, my bosses used to try to pressure me into speaking and reading news that I didn't believe was true, and then it was a lie. I said to them, "I'm not going to read this." And then I lost my job. After I lost my job, I used to do activism for the Amhara people on different social media platforms. Fast forward to April 12th, 2024, an incident occurred in the capital city, Addis Ababa, where the government claimed there was an operation by Fano militia leader Nahuzane Andarj in Addis Ababa, and because of the personal relationship that I had with him, they charged me with terrorism, which I've never participated in. I was detained with 300 other ethnic Amhara by the government on suspicion of participating in the operation. So, when I heard they were going to charge me, I fled to the countryside where my family lived in the Amhara region that was occupied by Fano at that time. So I was safe from being jailed. I stayed there, and I tried to be a voice for the victims of drone attacks in the war, while I tried to make documentaries over there also. After I stayed there for 4 months, it was hard for me to keep living there because I grew up in city, and then I couldn't live there anymore. So I tried to flee from the country. I came back to Addis and went to the airport to leave the country. While I was in the airport, people from the intelligence office found me and detained me. They were trying to take me to the police station, but while we were in the car, my family called them. They tried to bargain with them, and then we paid a lot of money. The security officers released me from the car, and the same day I went to Hawassa, then to the south, then eventually left the country. I entered Uganda around the beginning of September ND. Now I'm hosting on 251 media. I'm trying to be a voice for my people. That's my story. My name is Abanet Abraham, and I am a journalist living in exile in Kampala, Uganda. I have worked for different Ethiopian TV stations for the last 17 years. Throughout this time, I worked for Ethiopian television, Ethiopian broadcast service as a resident correspondent and team leader, and then the news and current events program director on the TV network, which is called Ethiopian News Network. When the Abiy regime came to power, there was an immediate conflict between the Abiy regime and the Ethiopian News Network. The regime began operating in a hostile nature towards the network to the point that the television station was eventually closed. During the time until the closure, the government tried to forbid us from reporting in general and even began publicly showing hostility toward Ethiopian News Network. In a public speech, the Prime Minister publicly made allegations against the network and the ENN professionals. Following these public statements, the network was closed, and its former employees could not find work as no other media was willing to accommodate or to hire the journalist from ENN. I began working on personal media projects, where I was actively writing critically against regime. In spite of pressure from pro-government activists, I seriously wrote my political opinions. I started a new company, Bluetooth Media, with my colleagues, but political pressures led us to close that company. I then joined ABC TV, which is where I am working now, living in Addis Ababa, but working for a US-based network, which is critical against the regime. You can imagine how serious it could be. So I hid myself. For 1 year while I was an anchor at ABC TV, I was hiding myself from any visibility in a sense that when the government crackdown had become intense in Ethiopia, most of our colleagues were taken to jail, concentration camps, and so on. I then convinced myself that I should not be in the hands of these people. Since there were calls for our arrest from government activists and intimidation against us on social media, I decided to hide myself. I'm still in Ethiopia, but hidden. I was still working for ABC. As I was writing articles, I was supposed to narrate. I was supposed to present it with video and image, but because I am known, I know that they will come to arrest me. I hid my image as a TV journalist, but I worked as a newspaper reporter, continuing to hide myself. Even my name is not presented on TV. I worked that way for 1 year, limiting myself and my physical movement. I was limited to my house and around that I should not be visible anywhere because all my friends or journalists or my colleagues had been arrested or taken to a wash arbor or some concentration camps. And I know that I am the next one, but I believe that I should not be in the hands of these people. So I continued to hide myself in every way. For a time it continues, but I cannot continue that way anymore. So I understand that I should leave the country. I cannot be visible on social media. So I deactivated my Facebook. I deactivated my Twitter account. I deactivated everything because I should be invisible. So my plan was to let them guess or assume that I'm not in Addis Ababa or Ethiopia, which is why I tried to work to hide myself at times, especially when the crackdown was intense. I was trying to move to my friend's house, just spending some nights with them, knowing that government forces will come at midnight to journalists' houses and take us to jail. So I believe that I cannot continue that way, and I decided to leave the country. So I'm here. I came to Kampala, and I continue my work at ABC as an editor from here. But the moment I left Ethiopia, they saw me on TV after a week since I left. The security forces went to my house, and they arrested my wife. They took her to an empty house to spend the night. In fact, they took her from our house 4 different times where they repeatedly beat and intimidated her to the point that she was bleeding from the head. We have 2 kids, 6 and 8 years old. My wife is just innocent and had nothing to do with my job. They forced her to stop her job, and she tried to move to her family out of Addis Ababa, but they called her and told her that they need her for investigations. So when she came back, they came to the house to take her and to search the house. They came to her house to conduct investigations and to check the house every time. She was even physically damaged in a way that she had some bleeding on her head and problems with her liver for a time. When they were interrogating her, they were asking her, "Where is your husband? Is he with the Bushmen in Amhara? Are you working with him? Are you informing him? Are you supporting him?" This is what they were doing during the intimidation. So I know this, but I could not stop my job. I continued. I know they are doing this just to stop me, but once I left my country, I cannot stop. What else can I do than leave my country, leave my beloved family? So even after leaving my country, where else can I go? What else can I do? They want to stop us even after we leave the country. So that's where I am now. My family is somehow all right, but I'm not going back again. And now I'm here trying to reveal what the regime is doing. So this is where I am. These are the voices of a few of the journalists, mainly of Amhara descent, who are currently living in exile among a larger population of East Africans living in Uganda by choice or in exile. Belay and the others continue to report on the crimes of the Ethiopian government and its abuses of power and still face a continual stream of death threats from supporters and agents of the current Ethiopian regime. They all face the future with a great amount of uncertainty, but are determined to report the truth to the world in hopes that those who value truth and justice will join the chorus of voices seeking to end human rights abuses in Ethiopia and hold the Ethiopian government accountable for its crimes against humanity. I wrote this piece to shed light on the fate of the numerous journalists who were forced to flee Ethiopia, leaving behind the lives they once knew in order to escape a murderous authoritarian regime that destroys the life of its citizens at will and without remorse. I am indebted to the Federation of Amharas in North America for its support that enabled me to respond to this story on very short notice. This story on very short notice. This story on very short notice.
ተመልሰናል ተመልካቾቻችን። Jamal, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Thank you for just taking time to speak with me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I really truly appreciate your willingness to share me the stories and also the situations back in Uganda. So I want to start my question by asking you what really inspired you to travel to Uganda and just to make reports or stories about the journalists in exile, the Ethiopian journalists in exile. Okay. I want to start by that one.
All right. Well, I originally was going to Uganda to do some different types of documentation. I'd been doing work in the region in Rwanda on culture, coffee, history, things like that. And then I was made aware of the situation in Uganda with journalists from Ethiopia who were living in exile and being threatened with being returned or being sought by the current government in Ethiopia. So I decided to make an appeal to FANA and ask them for help to help me rearrange my trip, some logistical support, and I went to Uganda to speak with these journalists and to try to get a better understanding of the story because the information is not making it to the West. We don't understand their plight. We don't understand fully why they're even there or that they're even there in the first place. So I wanted to kind of clear all that up.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. How did you just collaborate with FANA? FANA is Federation of Amhara Association in America. So
yes,
how was the collaboration started?
I gave them a last-minute proposal, a very last-minute proposal. And I said, okay, I'm going here, but I want to go here. I want to spend time doing X, getting this information. You can't just go into a situation like that and just ask people to speak about things that are personal or very intense for them. So it's a matter of spending time and actually warming up and getting to know and getting people to feel comfortable enough to talk about something that's very painful to them. You know, so FANA listened, they agreed, they gave me the support that I needed to go spend the extra time I needed to spend there to get the stories that I did from the people I spoke to.
Yeah. How did you find the situations in Uganda, the situations that the journalists, most of them are my friends, my colleagues, so how did you find the situation and how many journalists that you met there? Tell me more about that situation.
So all total, I spoke to 16 subjects. I wanted to speak to more because I just wanted to give a clearer picture of the depth of the situation, but I managed to speak to 16 people over 3 days. And I had beforehand done some research and communicating with one or two of them, Belay in particular, who basically helped me to wrangle everyone else, and he told me his story. It just kind of gave me a heads up as to what I was walking into. And I decided after speaking with him and getting the background from other sources as well, you know, to go in, establish a safe place, a safe zone for them to speak, and then let them tell their stories. So I basically just opened up the camera, the microphone, the books to let them tell their stories fully, you know. And I recorded the videos in raw format. There's no bells or whistles. It's just like straight camera on you. You tell me what you're comfortable with. Talk about your experience. And, you know, you could see the kind of pain that kind of wells up when people start to recount those stories. And it's something I talk about, where you have to be very cognizant of somebody's trauma, right? You have to be very careful when you ask people to recount painful situations, because you're re-traumatizing them. So I just basically gave specific instructions like, I'm going to let you talk. I want you to be aware of what's too painful to talk about. If you endured 2 or 3 days of torture in a WASH military camp, you don't have to go into specifics and tell me what happened to you. You can just say you endured torture. But to get somebody to go into granular detail, it can be pretty destructive sometimes. Yeah.
But what kind of stories that mostly touched you, from those whole things?
As a father, several of the men that I spoke to have 2 kids, like I do. They're almost the same age as mine, and they're all separated from their kids and their wives. So they can't see them. They have to communicate with them the best way they can. They miss the everyday interaction of a child growing up. So some of the most important years of a child's life are not being witnessed by the father, So for me, that was very painful. I mean, during the war, I would visit for 6 weeks, 4 weeks, just weeks at a time, but I could always go back home to my kids. And even with those breaks, my kids were still affected, and I was affected. So now I'm trying to imagine what it is to be separated from your children for 8 months, a year, almost 2 years in some cases. And that sticks with me, and that kind of drove me to want to do as much as I could once I got home.
You remembered me the story that you've been covering during the war, and even before the war also. You've been covering the stories about the displaced Amharas in Matakal and from Wallaga, Walqaitra, and different areas. And I did see those amazing pictures from there. So what common threads were there between those stories and the story in Uganda?
A dehumanization of people based upon their ethnicity. Dehumanization just across the board for themselves, their families, what have you. It's like we have minimized the effects of trauma. It's not even in anybody's regular vocabulary to talk about the psychological impacts of trauma and PTSD. So when I try to raise these questions with people to get them to understand, it's a little foreign to them because everybody is tough. But the reality is, beneath that toughness, the brain still does what it does. The brain will still suffer from trauma. You will still have the psychological effects from trauma. And you will wake up one day in a year in a cold sweat, just going through a whole plethora of emotions, and you're not understanding that you're suffering from PTSD. So we take trauma for granted. Trauma occurs from the littlest to the eldest. And that's the thing, that's the common thread. It's like a really deep, permanently scarring, dehumanizing trauma that they all endure. From Metiko, they come to Chagni to the IDP camp, and then months later the food warehouse is burned down.
Yeah.
You have in Bahardar, when you had the IDPs in Zanzalima, some of those people who walked from
Zanzalima,
yeah. And then one of my last trips there, they were like, oh, well, the government is closing it because it's an eyesore. It's an eyesore for people who are displaced from war to be at a facility that's outside of the city. And they were like, oh, well, Sokoto is fine, it's secure, they can go back to Waghemra. And we know that wasn't true. So I actually made it a point to follow those IDPs in particular, because we met in Zanzalima, I formed relationships with some of them, and then when they get back to Waghemra, they're in actually worse conditions because it's hotter, the temperatures are different, it's drier, food resources are scarce still. So it's a type of trauma that people are expected to endure that, it is unparalleled. It's unheard of, and that's why I focus on being the visual documentarian, because once you see the pictures, I would hope that if there's any ounce of humanity, you're convicted to do something. Yeah, but it's unbearable.
Yeah. Did they tell you, let me take you back to the journalists, and did they tell you the story, how they flee to Uganda, how the situation was? Because I know some stories that my friends told me how it was worse. And did they tell you that? Did they share you the story how they flee and how they are accepted and welcomed in Uganda?
Well, I will say that they shared the commonality seemed to be Awash Arba prison or Awash military camp.
Yeah.
The other commonality is torture. So they talk about how when they are imprisoned, they are tortured. It's almost like an expected thing. They're tortured psychologically and physically. Their families are threatened. The police, when they are released and allowed to go back home, the security services will show up at their house and rearrest them or harass them at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night. And like I said, most of these people had kids. So you're once again going back to layers of trauma with children, with the adults. The family life is upended, and ultimately people have to make the decision to leave, especially after being in the Awash military camp. So they said it was horrendous. Belay's story is very touching. I don't want to butcher anybody's name.
Yeah, I know.
But I do believe it's Abanet who told me about the situation. And basically when the government couldn't get to him, they tortured his wife, and that just made me mad. I had to kind of maintain composure as he was telling me the story. And he told me some things off camera. And, you as a journalist, you have to maintain your composure and be professional, even in the face of the most deplorable of circumstances. So you have to keep a straight face when a man is talking to you about having his wife tortured. So, yeah.
Are there other refugees that you see there, and did you get a chance to compare the situations of the Ethiopians and the other refugees? Is there something different?
Well, what's different is that, President Museveni has stated publicly that he welcomes people who are escaping to Uganda from other African countries. He says he welcomes them. They can live there freely if they're fleeing persecution. I Googled and looked up, and I saw a meeting he had with members of the Orthodox Church, and just the general statements that he made about, it being a place of refuge. So I was happy to hear that, And, the Ugandan people, I did not have one bad encounter with anybody from Uganda. They were beautiful people, very beautiful people, very kind people. In terms of the displaced people in Uganda, I didn't get a chance to really explore beyond the 16 people that I talked to. But by and large, I would say that it ranges from people feeling safe to people feeling unsafe because they know how the Ethiopian forces are working desperately to return them back to Ethiopia, to re-imprison them and do whatever they would want to do, because ultimately the goal is to silence anybody who's talking about what's happening.
Yeah, when you talk to the 16s, let's talk about them. So were they safe? Did they trust you to tell the stories? Did they feel safe to share the stories?
They felt safe because they'd seen the work I'd done previously. I mean, during the war, I think all of us were working in some capacity telling some of those same stories. We weren't all at the same IDP camps, but we knew we had the same subjects, right? So there was kind of a mutual respect. And then there's also the serious. When I approach people, I'm very serious. I'm like, listen, even though you're sitting here in front of me, you don't have to do this interview. If you're not comfortable, you don't have to talk to me. If you had cold feet, there's no ego, there's no persistent desire to force a story out of you, because that's ultimately putting you in harm's way, putting you at risk, and making you uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So I put my subjects' comfort first, their safety and security first. And so if somebody comes and says, okay, well, I don't really want to say anything. As a matter of fact, I don't know if I can do this.
But how about the situation? I understand that they trust you, they were safe with you because, as you said, we know you on your previous works. But living in Uganda and speaking about their stories, and do they feel safe to share the stories?
It's half and half. It's half and half. They felt safe talking to me, and I would go back and say, listen, this is what you said. Are you okay with this? And most people are like, yes, I want to tell my story. I want to tell my story. And it kind of brought me back to Maikadra.
Yeah.
I want to tell my story. I want to tell my story. I know I lost everything, but I want to tell my story. And I made people's safety crucial, the focal point. They felt safe. One or two said that they don't feel safe, primarily because of INSA. And because of the fact that, there are elements of extremist groups in Uganda mixed in with the population. So people do feel a little uneasy.
Yeah. So what challenges do you face while you're reporting there?
I had people telling me, please be careful. There's Sheni, there's other extremists, there's Blue Brigade, there's all of these people there.
Where?
In Uganda.
In Uganda?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was like, you know what, Xavier.
Xavier, I know.
It's you go to God for protection, especially when you're committed to acts of justice, and I leave it in God's hands, It doesn't mean you're not street smart. It doesn't mean you're not, setting up the situation to kind of be in control editorially and in terms of safety. So, you interview in places that are secure, and you just are aware of your surroundings at all times. You just make sure that you can see what's coming and going. You can see all of your entry points and exit points, So you have to kind of survey, lay out what if situations, So
how do these exiled journalists continue their work? How are they? I know most of them are connected to their works still. Most of them are connected with the stories that they have been covering previously when they were in Ethiopia. Did they tell you about how they are trying to connect with the journalism still?
Well, there's, most of them are working with 251 Media. Just about everybody is active on TikTok, and other social media, which is highly effective. Regardless of what you say about TikTok. And as I explained to people here, it's like there's a reason why they wanted to ban TikTok in the US, because it's information unrestrained, So it's like, yeah, there's a lot of goofiness and things and games, but then it's like if you find yourself in their situation and you really want to talk about it, you can get on TikTok, 30-second video, and you can spread information like wildfire, because it goes around the world. It's unrestrained, It's not like YouTube, where there are forces that are close to the Ethiopian government that are helping to take down YouTube videos, through mass reporting and other methods that they have. It's a crucial weapon, I would say. It's a crucial tool in the fight to disseminate information on a grassroots level. Yeah.
So did they tell you, or did you try to find out how they are living, who is financially supporting them? As you said, most of them, and I also know most of them have, family back home, and they don't have any other work. So is there any organization, or is there any way that they get financial support to their family or to themselves?
For the sake of safety of information and support lines, I kind of left some of those questions off camera, and I didn't want to want them to feel like they had to divulge that information. There are informations through FANA who are interested in supporting them, so I made them aware of that, you know, and I didn't push too much, you know, because there are certain trigger questions that can kind of raise the hair on the back of your neck, and I didn't want to have that happen.
So what kind of support do you think they need?
As journalists, they need what journalists need. They need primarily, you know, for those of us in the field who want to do like quick reporting, phones, like the latest phones, you know, bigger memory, bigger capacity, better cameras, you know. I was willing to donate equipment that I had, and they're like, no, we don't need cameras. I was like, okay, all right. They need phones. Phones, lapel mics, you know, things like that, you know. So there's those kind of things, because the one thing that just earned my deepest respect is that they are willing to do the work. Hardcore, 100%, even in this situation, irregardless of what's happening in terms of threats and the online threats that they receive. People are still receiving death threats online, social media, in their DMs. So in spite of all that, they want to continue reporting, you know? Yeah.
So what roles do you think the international organizations, like human rights organizations and medias should do or should play in order to amplify those voices?
I think that it would be admirable for some of these organizations to go and talk to them themselves, right? I mean, you can take my reporting and just springboard off of that, take a trip to Uganda, talk to more people, and understand why would people want to leave a country with such a healthy economy and with all of these things that are pushed to the West about the success stories of Ethiopia now. They should focus on the fact that these people are in exile for a reason, and that they were tortured. Just about everybody was tortured in prison, you know? And I think that's a major red flag. And it's always the hallmark of an oppressive regime when journalists are victimized, you know, and forced to leave their own country and leave their families behind. I think that that's the sticking point. That should be the draw, because everybody left family behind just because they wanted to do their jobs. And they're all trained. They're all trained journalists, professional journalists. And I mean, it says something. It says a lot. So the international community, international aid organizations, and organizations that are about the protection and rights of journalists should focus on their treatment and what they've endured and why they had to leave Ethiopia in the first place.
Did you try to communicate some kinds of like organization after you worked?
Yeah, when I got back, I immediately asked my editor at Redux to reach out to CPJ, the Committee for the Protection of Journalists. He also reached out to Amnesty, and I'm trying to broker a conversation with Reporters Without Borders in France, in addition to all of the other publications within their client base that they service on a regular.
Jamal, you photographed musics, you photographed wars, and I see most of your pictures, especially what you did in Ethiopia, the photograph that you take, and the stories as a whole, and also war, music, and different things. So how did the war, and even cultural things that I saw, so how did your works connect each other?
Humanity. Humanity. When I do a lot of the entertainment work that I do, I focus on emotions and humanity. In a lot of the positions that I'm in, I'm often backstage or in kind of, I don't want to say VIP settings to sound pretentious, but there are situations where you have a chance to really see people for who they are. So that's the common thread throughout everything, is reality, who people really are, what they're really dealing with. Happiness, joy, sadness, suffering, you know. It's all about the human condition for me, without pretension, without, you know, the BS.
Do you have any image that can, or encounter that you can describe, you know, that stayed with you from all those things that you did? Maybe from the regions that you've been there, or from Uganda?
I think there's the sad image, and then there's the image that gives you hope. So, you know, the image that gives me hope, or that really kind of sent a feeling through me, was when I was in Kambalcha and I was in an IDP camp, a small IDP camp. And I was in an area.
Where, Kambalcha?
And there was a woman who was cooking, and she was talking to me in Amharic, and you know I don't know Amharic. And I have my translator who's nearby. And so, you know, she's saying something to me, she's like kind of tugging at me, you know, come wait, you know, so da 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 da. And so she's making some wet, and she offers me to taste, right? And there's a picture, and actually I serviced it through Getty, where she's offering me the taste, you know, the gesture of friendship and respect. And I didn't understand exactly what it was, but everybody was like, yo, she was giving you this gesture out of, you know, pure kindness, you know. And the look on her face, she just looked like somebody's mother who wanted me to taste her food, you know. And the thing that is really kind of telling throughout a lot of those experiences is that in several of these IDP camps, or where I had a chance to visit people in these conditions and they were cooking, everybody offered food, even as IDPs. You know, even in the moments of suffering and lacking, people would offer to share food with you, you know. So that's something that really stuck with me, you know. And it's in Afar, it's in Amhara, you know, it's everywhere I've been where there's been struggle, yeah.
Where have you been when you were in Ethiopia? Those places, just to remind them. The places you've been there.
Chakni, there was the areas around Bahar Dar. There was Emabet, if I'm saying it correctly. If I'm not, forgive me.
What?
Emabet. See, sorry. So there was there, and then there was the Bark, there was Chena, there was Lalibela, there's Aina Iyezus, there's Mekele, there's Walkite, there is, let me see, there's Chifra, there's Samara, there was, I didn't quite make it to Abagali and Afar, but basically, outside of covering a large portion of Tigray, I covered Afar and Amhara region, you know, South Wollo, yeah, so a lot of places that were affected by the war.
That's amazing, and thank you so much for all those references. Let me take you back to the journalist's story, just to summarize that. What can the diaspora do in order to help, in order to support those journalists who were in exile?
They can tell their stories, right? We should never be numb to retelling somebody's story of pain and hardship, you know? I mean, I look at like the people who are suffering in Ukraine or Gaza, and all of those journalists who die in Gaza, we know their stories. I mean, there are people who could probably tell you the names of 15 journalists who died in Gaza, right? We as a diaspora should make that situation our situation in terms of knowing who these journalists are, knowing their hardships, knowing the torture they endured at the hands of the Ethiopian government, the current regime, and repeating those stories, right? Never be fatigued about talking about somebody else's plight, you know? We find excuses to not talk about the suffering of our colleagues, you know, when we should be talking about them every day to anybody, you know? Not begging people to listen, but just the people that want to listen, educate them, make them aware, you know? We should know we should know the journalists, and then based upon that, on their own terms, support them, you know? Listen to what the journalists are requesting and support them that way.
Do you have any idea about the situations the situations of the journalists who are under arrest, or do you have any plan to cover those stories?
That are under arrest? Well, they're in Ethiopia.
Yeah, I know, but
yeah.
about covering the stories.
Yes, I mean, I've been dying to. You know, I've been dying to. It's just that information is so scarce. It's very hard to get out, and I can't get back into the country because of they won't let me back in. So it's very hard, you know. So it's a matter of networking to try to get those in prison, get their accounts out, and then we can retell those stories as well. Yeah.
Jamal, do you have any kind of like surprising moment or unexpected thing that you face in Uganda while you're trying to cover the story?
Surprising moment. Well, I have pleasant memories of one of the journalists, Jerusalem. Yes, is an amazing cook. Amazing cook.
Really?
Yes, she's an amazing cook. So once again, here it is. We're sitting here talking about the plight of these people who are in exile, her and her colleagues, and she breaks out the tips which were amazing. She made great tips. She's an exceptional cook. The coffee was amazing. What I thought was interesting was, in spite of Uganda being a coffee powerhouse, she was still making coffee with Ethiopian beans.
Wow.
You know? So, and I was like, oh wow, okay, go ahead.